Hey there, my name is AJ Pickett and I make videos about role-playing games, and lots of them. I upload twice a week with a live stream every weekend. You can find me on Subscribestar, Patreon and Discord, Facebook and Twitter. Also, there's an option to join the channel as a member, and I welcome any questions you have in the comments section down below. If you like this video or this channel, hit that like button if you would be so kind. Today we're looking at a classic monster from way back, originating in the Mystara world setting, first appearing in the D&D Basic Expert Rules Wilderness Adventure, The Isle of Dread in 1981 by David Cook and Tom Moldvay. I could easily make a video about this module, and one day I most likely will, but in the first listing for the Aranea, we discover these quite terrifying arcane giant spiders for the first time, and I can tell you, they left an impression on me when I first met them. The physical description of them has changed very little over the many years, so here is how they were first described in their original listing for the known world, as back when The Isle of Dread was published, the campaign setting that Tom Moldvay and Lawrence Schick created was not yet known as Mystara. Aranea were described as an intelligent giant spider race, as large as a small pony, and greenish-brown in colour. An Aranea can be distinguished from other giant spiders by the massive odd-shaped lump on its back, or cephalothorax, that houses its large brain. The Aranea are remarkable web spinners, and their bite is poisonous. The front limbs of an Aranea, where a spider's pedipalps would normally be, are divided into finger-like flexible digits at the end, which the Aranea uses to grasp prey and manipulate simple tools. In spider anatomy, these palps are evolved from secondary antennae and have functions as secondary mouthparts, sensory organs, sexual organs, and in species like the scorpion, they form the pincer arms. The Aranea are a step beyond that, and their palps are basically the equivalent of humanoid hands, dexterous enough to perform all sorts of tool-using tasks, and in addition, they can use them to help cast spells. See, the Aranea can cast spells as a third-level magic user. Originally this meant they could cast 2 first-level and 1 second-level arcane spell. And inside their well-camouflaged web homes high up in the canopy of dense forests and jungles, the Aranea spend their spare time engaged in magical research. In the covered and weatherproof central domes of their lairs, they keep their crude tools, magical research, and furniture constructed of webs, vines, bark, and wood. Often around the base of these huge trees they inhabit, you can find groups of bugbears who are on friendly terms with the giant arachnids and serve as their guards, scouts, and thieves. Aranea have a serious hatred for a species of halfling-sized, intelligent, gliding raccoon monkeys called the Fanaton, a little bit like Ewoks, which exist in fairly large tribes also high up in the forest canopy, kind of like more arboreal wing-membraned lemur people with long prehensile tails who get along well with elves and dryads and such, and also absolutely loathe the Aranea in return. On Mystara, in the primeval days, the Aranea once existed in much larger numbers. They had a potential conflict with a species of lizard folk called the Wellara, themselves possessed of a mighty civilization which prized its advancements and had a love of knowledge and new technology, much like the Aranea do, which is fairly typical of a species in that stage of development. Well, we know this now, but back then the Wellara were one of the first intelligent species, and unfortunately the Aranea, ever a secretive species, were extremely paranoid about the Wellara stealing their magical knowledge, and made a preemptive strike against their entire race, casting a spell to modify the entire species' memory and wipe all information of the Aranea from their minds. The spell did far more than was intended, and sadly, the Wellara were reduced to a level of Stone Age primitive, and even now have only just advanced back to nomadic tribes of hunter-gatherers and small agrarian villages in the northern grasslands of the Orcs' Head Peninsula. To their credit, the Aranea carried a lot of historic guilt over what they did. They even destroyed all research and all copies of the Spell of Forgetting so that neither they nor anyone else could ever use it again. Some would say that they paid the price already for their crime, as an immortal patron of the dragons and Wellaras called the Great One sent an army of dragons against the Aranea shortly after, which reduced their empire to cinders, and the only thing that saved the Aranea species was their own patron immortal, Korotiku, who pleaded for mercy on the Aranea's behalf. Their race has since rebuilt their territory, and this got featured in a strange article, a series of events written from various different perspectives in Dragon Magazine number 183, which also describes the lands of the Great Magus, the Merocracy of Herath, in some detail. I'll read directly from the article as it's packed with information, though I will have to update some of the game rules that are mentioned there so it can be used in 5th edition. There's also some notes on undead Aranea and some details on how to include them as a player character race, which I'll talk about more towards the end of the video in brief. We'll see some notable changes to the species as the lore is expanded in this article, with a reduction in their size of their spider form from a small pony to a human-sized, or slightly larger. Oh yes, and the ability to shapeshift into a humanoid form, a feature that becomes one of their most recognisable traits. So, reading from the Dragon Magazine article. The Merocracy of Herath has a capital city of 186,000 Araneas and no outsiders named Belphamon, which was ruled by the wizard king Yahav IV, the Watcher, son of Queen Sorceress Amsharai II. The city's patron immortal is known as Yem. The Araneas of Mystara's savage coast are a secretive race. No one really knows that they exist because these Araneas have learned to take the shape of humanoid creatures when dealing with outsiders. This is not just civilized races, they can also take the form of goblinoids, Rakasta cat people, lupin dog people, turtle people, and so on. Araneas are spiderfolk. They're highly intelligent beings that look like human-sized spiders in their natural shape. Over the centuries, the Araneas have learned to use magic to subdue their environment, and they've also developed a unique culture that, if somewhat cold and immoral, remains nevertheless quite pragmatic. Araneas are predators, though, to whom humanoid flesh remains a delicacy. Because of this, and their clearly arachnid morphology, other races loathe the very mention of Araneas. Unruly children of the Rakasta cat people in their cottages and goblin yurts are often told stories about how scary Araneas come and take away disrespectful youngsters. Had the Araneas not learned to conceal their identities, the neighbouring realms would have annihilated the Aranean nation long ago. Today, the Araneas of the Savage Coast are thought to be the stuff of legends, mere mythology of the past. Thus, as the Aranean nation grew, laws and customs that reflected their behaviour and mentality were created. The young Araneas of Herath are taught from birth that they are two different people. One is the true Aranea, and the other is a humanoid alter ego. The Aranea's two personalities are very distinct, with two separate sets of histories and personal experiences that the Aranea learns to accept as legitimate identities. This is done to ensure that the Aranea will play its alter ego's role to perfection in order to better fool outsiders. And it's largely succeeded thanks in great part to the Aranea's superior intellect and this cultural conditioning. However, the practice does present a risk. Some Araneas develop split personalities. When this happens to an Aranea, it no longer knows it has a second personality and forgets what it did when it was in that other form. So deeply ingrained is the Aranea's double personality teaching that even the psychotic Araneas will always shut down its Aranean self and switch to its humanoid alter ego when in the presence of outsiders, and vice versa. One of the secret Aranean laws demands that Araneans switch to their humanoid form whenever they prepare to leave the Forest of the Magus. A further limitation exists on the Aranean's shape-changing ability. It can switch only between its two specific alter egos. It cannot use humanoid or Aranean identities other than those two given to it at birth by Aranean sages. These two original identities are chosen in accordance with the Aranean's family lineage. An Aranea of noble birth will be given a noble humanoid identity, and it's typical that all of the members of its family will share that humanoid lineage. Aranean imitation and acting are so good that a person can hardly tell whether or not a character they met for the first time is an Aranea. Furthermore, if wounded or killed in humanoid form, the Aranea does not revert back to its arachnid body as most other shapeshifters would do. It requires Dispel magic cast at 9th level spell slot to force an Aranea to adopt its true form. They can also be seen with True Sight though. This fosters a certain element of confusion very useful to intruding adventurers. No one knows for sure exactly where Aranea come from. Some say that they were a creation of the Immortals, an experiment with a race that was left unchecked. Others surmise they come from other worlds and adapted to Mystara, which seems likely considering their presence on so many other worlds, but that could also be a product of their magical research over the years. In any case, there are several Aranea realms in Mystara, all of which are exceedingly well concealed. Savage Coast Araneas spread out from the area that is presently their capital at the centre of the Forest of the Magus. Beneath the citadel there lies a huge network of caverns that saw their Aranean prehistory. Their primitive paintings and carvings remain a well-preserved silent testimony in just how long they've existed below the earth. Armed with their incredible abilities, the Aranea advanced remained unchecked within the confines of the Dark Forest, a thick wilderness only rarely visited by primitive hunters. When they reached the outer limits of the forest, the Araneas had already develop their shape-changing skills. They also knew all about the primitive humanoids' hatred and fear of their all things arachnid. Under their impenetrable disguises, the Araneas began mingling with the humanoid populations and soon came to think of the humanoids as their inferiors. They believed that the Aranean immortals put the savages there for the Araneas' own benefit, first as succulent edibles, then as convenient armies, and next, and finally, as a precious source of labour, revenue, and sometimes even magical innovation. However, in the immortals' infinite wisdom, savages were made dangerous and wonderfully varied so that their gifts could not be abused, and so the Araneas would need to learn and inspire themselves. In the past centuries, Savage Coast Araneas posed as wizards and slowly established their Merocracy, seizing power in the region without drawing undue attention and suspicion from the local folks proved to be an easy task for the crafty shapeshifters, and over the years, 4 wizards in particular established large domains and imposed their authority on the people there. Finally, the wizards declared allegiance to the great magus in the forest and united their domains into a single large realm. Non-Aranean wizards are unwelcome and promptly and quietly removed from any position of power there, and today the Aranean realm stretches from Beliane to the northern edge of the dark jungle in the Orc's Head Peninsula, which goes about 140 miles inland from its shore on the western sea. The common folk of Herath have grown accustomed to the thought of their ruler being a quiet and reclusive wizard. Over there in his tower at the heart of the dark forest, they have no reason to complain of their treatment or suspect the horrific truth about the ruling nobility. Day to day, their fate is comparable to any other nation's subjects really, except of course for the grim destination reserved for people who occasionally disappear without explanation. Once in a while, the great magus in humanoid shape visits one town or another or the court of his vassals. Most of the time, envoys or vassals nobles will conduct business with visiting dignitaries on behalf of the great magus. So far, no monarch abroad has had reasons to suspect anything other than the natural distrust of magocracies. After all, wizards can be strange indeed, can they not? The forest of the magus is off limits to all uninvited people. In any case, none of the local folk will enter the forest, since it's long been rumoured to be haunted and infested with monsters, a perfect place for wizards. The Great Magus lives in what would be called the capital of the Araneas. It's a great citadel where Araneas enjoy going about in their true shapes, unbothered by human visitors. There, the most brilliant Aranean minds help the Great Magus determine his nation's fate and rule his subjects, humanoid and Aranean. The citadel reaches 100 feet into the air but delves 10 times deeper below the ground, connecting with ancient caverns with many more Araneas dwelling down in there. The deepest and oldest caverns hold sacred grounds for temples as well as dark secrets and clues to the true origins of the Araneas. 6 fortresses delineate the Great Magus's domain. Each is the home base for Aranea patrols in humanoid shape that guard the edge of the woods, and these fortresses connect with each other with the Great Magus's citadel through the many tunnels and caverns. Each fortress is a magical building that marks the edge of the Magus's magical power. See, an invisible web of magic emanates from the citadel and affects the whole forest. The web is an immaterial extension of the Great Magus's mind, allowing them to sense everything inside the forest, including the predominant feelings and physical sensations of visitors. If an animal is killed, the Magus may sense it, but the Magus can't actually read any thoughts, just sort of surface impressions. And the greater the intensity of the sensations, the higher the chance the Magus will start to pay attention, unless there's some reason the Magus may be searching for something specific. But the Magus doesn't spend all day in this sort of activity. He's far more interested in political intrigue and magical influence over his domain, maintaining a delicate balancing act between the outposts, the orcs, the other humanoids, and so on, promoting trade and avoiding open warfare at all costs. Across the Gulf of the Phlogiston, we have the Aranea of the world of Toril, which brings us to later editions of Dungeons & Dragons and the further evolution of the so-called spiderweres. Again, the main features of the species have not changed that much. They're very secretive. Most people in faerun don't know anything at all about them. And there is a place in Kalimshan known as the Spider Swamp, which is a bit of a clue that something arcane and arachnid may be going on there. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. On Toril, Aranea often look more like humans from Kalimshan or Kalimshan half-elves, or in some cases drow elves. Again, thanks to their culture and conditioning, the form and gender they take is fixed at birth. Their natural spider form is still medium-sized, and they have 2-foot-long arms that end in hands with 4 many-jointed fingers and double-jointed thumbs. They're described as having their brain hump on their back, not the head section, which is a bit confusing, as the D&D writers don't seem to want to use the proper terms for the parts of a spider body, or maybe, I don't know, they never looked at a spider before, because spiders don't have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. They don't have a back. The head and thorax are one and the same. So does that go... I'm guessing it's behind the eyes on the cephalothorax, so it kind of looks like a hump behind the eyes and mouth parts, which makes it look like they do have a head, but spiders don't have a neck any more than scorpions do. Anyway, they are certainly located in other places apart from the spider swamp in Kalimshan, but it's described in brief to us in the Forgotten Realms campaign guide for 3rd edition and has not had much of an update since 4th edition. The spider swamp formed at the conflux of 2 sluggish rivers after a powerful married genie was killed there, because there's a history of genies in Kalimshan, releasing its elemental power and forming a hot, fetid swamp inhabited by monstrous spiders, Aranea, who traded fine silks and rare herbs, bullywugs, and lizard folk. The swamp's always been avoided by all but the most foolhardy. In the northern part of the swamp is a location called Lost Adjutal, a submerged Iranian city which became transformed during an extended period of drought due to the cataclysm of the Second Sundering, but has since returned to being a swamp again. Within this seemingly ruined place is a thriving population of Aranea. Now, one thing I see a lot of people describing the Aranea of faerun as being associated with drow and lolth. They are not. They have about a third of the population devoted to their deity Zanazu, who was described in places as being an aspect of the drow god Selvetam. But this gives a false impression, so let's have a look at their history and clear this up. Lolth, the queen of spiders, was an enemy of the demon named Zanazu since her banishment to the abyss, and having to drive him out of her realm in the demonware pit there. In the year 290 Dale Reckoning, Zanazu was summoned by some of the Aranea of the Spider Swamp, who were desperate for aid against the Empress Shun V, who mistakenly blamed the Aranea for a plague that had befallen Raven and was waging a brutal and sudden war to annihilate their race. The desperate Aranea embraced Zanazu's dark power, and 2 years later the demon led them in battle against the capital of the Shun Imperium itself. However, Shun V's magical defences and her loyal troops defeated him, and he was banished back to the Abyss. His Aranea servants retreated back to the Spider Swamp. Sensing his return to the Abyss, Lolth plotted to destroy Zanazu by telling her grandson, and head of the order militant of her own church named Selvetam, that it would please his patron Illustrae if he defeated Zanazu and absorbed his power. Selvetam barely even required that thin excuse to pick a fight with a demon, and to be honest, yeah, he really did. So while Zanazu was still weakened by his loss against the forces of Shun V, Selvetam attacked and was victorious over the Demon Lord, absorbing his chaotic evil power and becoming even more bloodthirsty and evil as a result, much to the dismay of his aunt Illustrae, who was trying to sway him to the side of good and away from his grandmother Lolth. For Lolth, this was just a nice way to piss off his Illustrae and kill one of her enemies all at once. Meanwhile, the Aranea of the Spider Swamp were unaware of these happenings on another plane of existence, and for at least the next millennium, a subsection of the Aranea continued to worship Zanazu, oblivious to the fact that they were truly serving Selvetam, a servant of the Spider Queen. By 1370 DR, fewer than 100 priests and worshippers of Zanazu remained, and had established an elaborate temple for him in Lost Adjutal that looks like a stone dome in the shape of a giant spider with a minaret at each corner of the courtyard, and stone webbing extending from the central dome to each of the minarets. The Temple of Zanazu is well defended, and because it also protected the non-evil Aranea living below the ruined city, the evil Aranea clergy are generally tolerated, along with their niche religion. Selvetam, of course, rarely sends an avatar to the prime material plane, but when he does, it appears as a large spider, sometimes with the head of a male drow and usually carrying a signature heavy venomous mace in his right hand and a longsword called Thalic Valve in his other hand. Most of the time, he completely ignores prayers and pleas from his clergy, or if he does listen and manifest something, it's a sphere of utter blackness that gradually grows to explode into a blade barrier. Of course, the Aranea still call him Zanazu and still believe he is a deity of craftiness, patience and subtlety, so it's probably for the best that he doesn't manifest or talk to them very often, as Selvetam is none of those things. Some scholars think Selvatarn was always a demon anyway. The mythology and religion of the Drow simply elevated him to the status of god after Lolth promoted a demon to serving her as one of her champions. That's very much up for debate though. One reason for the confusion about the Aranea being able to take on a third spider form, like a spider humanoid form, is the 3rd edition monster listing for them, which I think suffers from the writers just assuming that any sort of were creature can take on a hybrid form between animal and humanoid form. Aranea do not do this. They never have in their lore. 3rd edition got it wrong. Throw away all your Monster Girl fan art, guys. I'm sorry. Thanks to the disaster that befell the spider swamp, most of the giant spiders that lived there got turned into creatures of living stone, and once the swamp returned, the spiders remained in their new stone form. The Aranea took advantage of this, and of course you can encounter them in their humanoid form riding these stone spiders as tireless mounts around the wilderness of Kalimshan and the city ports along the shore of the Lake of Steam, the forests of Myr, and the mountains of Alamir. Aranea prefer to avoid physical combat and make use of others to do the fighting for them, or use their webs and sorcery to take out enemies before they can get anywhere near them. I've created a stat block conversion of the Aranea for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, link to that on the D&D Beyond website in the description text under the video. It matches up with the AD&D lore on them and provides their basic abilities. Remember, you can provide Aranea with unique spells of their race's own creation. They've been at spell creation for a very long time. You can also give them magic items that they will possibly be able to use in combat and that are specifically designed for this humanoid or spider form. I'll leave it up to you. I didn't include information such as the fact that most Aranea can control regular spiders and influence giant spiders. Now, as promised, there are a couple of undead variants of the Aranea. Yeshoms were an experiment to grant an Aranea immortality, augmenting their shapeshifting and enhancing spellcasting power. It went horribly, horribly right. Transformed the Araneans who underwent the procedure into slime-like undead monsters whose psyches were scarred by the transformation, which ultimately drove them insane and evil. Even more evil. In its normal form, the Yeshom resembles a large puddle of oily black tar, but it can take the form of any man-sized or smaller creature. But each form retains its characteristic shiny black with liquid texture. These grotesque creatures are virtually indestructible. Alongside a strong resistance to magic, they are immune to any form of energy discharge, as well as being immune to charm spells, sleep spells, hold spells, death magic, poison. Plus, they can only be hurt by magical weapons. They can dissolve creatures with their touch, like a black pudding, and any creature destroyed by a Yeshom has its very soul destroyed. Not even a wish can restore the victims. They can also envelop victims and trap them in suspended animation within a pocket plane that only the Yeshom can access, where the Yeshom draw upon that victim's memories for a very long time. Cruel, irrational, and very, very bored, the sadistic undead prefer to draw out the agony of the death, prolonging the victim's terror. The only good thing about them is that they're extremely territorial, and they rarely, if ever, move from their isolated lairs and never have minions, not even undead slaves. Arashaim are believed to be the result of Aranea attempting to undergo the Lich transformation, although whether or not they are successes is a matter of perspective. These undead spiderwares retain their shapeshifting, being able to transform between these zombie-like form, a giant undead spider or a humanoid. Highly intelligent and equally arrogant, they retain an appetite for flesh, much like a cannibal zombie or a ghoul, but are still powerful mages wielding deadly magic in pursuit of their goals of conquest and domination. Their venom is a powerful paralytic, and some strange aspect of their necrology causes their webbing to be imbued with a similar paralytic toxin. Unlike a true lich, they have no phylacteries and thus they cannot return if destroyed. They also retain the vulnerability to anti-shapeshifter weaponry carried by their living kin. So as for adapting them as a playable character race, you can use the monster listing as it is for a 5th level character. If you want to start them off at a lower level, they don't have the poison bite or sorcery unless you trade in their feat selections to attain those natural racial abilities. At a higher level, racial abilities to unlock may include a more lethal form of their spider venom that also applies to their piercing and slashing weapons if they basically lick them and apply toxin, and the ability to command spiders. They would have a racial bonus to charisma and constitution, and a cultural bonus in that their sorcery abilities are trained into them from an early age as a background feature. Also, Aranea raised in other cultures may not have the sorcery ability, and it may be possible for them to take on more than one type of humanoid form when they shapeshift. Please hit the like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Subscribestar or Patreon links for all the full scripts for these videos, buy some Teespring merchandise, wear your geek with pride, and as always, thanks for listening, I'll be back with more for you very soon.